Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a summer edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. And let's be honest, I just asked to do this so I can see Jim Eichenhofer, because if not, I wouldn't see you until October. No, wait a minute, July. We'll get to that in a quick second. That's Call the Tease. What's up, sir? How are you?
I'm great, Gus. It's great to be back in the podcast studio here. It's been too long.
It has been, for sure. At least you still know how to let me in, so that's good. That's good. It's good seeing you. Look, the regular season and the postseason now have come to a conclusion with the NBA draft Wednesday and Thursday for the first time ever, first and second round. Will Guillory of The Athletic, Louisiana Sports Writers Association Beat Reporter of the Year. And that got announced recently, so I can't wait to talk to him about his thoughts on the draft overall, what the Pels may do, free agency, all that stuff. But we have to start with the most important topic ever. The Lakers have a brand new head coach.
Indeed, they do. And there was an interesting moment or two from J.J. Redick's press conference. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh,
he was asked about, the naysayers, the negativity on social media. Yeah. And, maybe he could have phrased it a little bit better. But I loved his answer in terms of, I feel like when people ask coaches or athletes, this type of question seems to be rising in frequency and prominence, where people say, like, hey, the haters, the negative people out there say X, Y, Z about you. How do you respond to that? And the way that he succinctly answered it, I thought was probably kind of an example that other people can follow, maybe without a four-letter word. No. But I thought the way that he kind of just pointed out that just like, I just don't care. And I feel like players are asked that all the time, and they kind of circle it and kind of say like, well, we have to block out the noise and that kind of thing. But I mean, I think the way that he said it was really the perfect response, which is just like, it's meaningless, it's useless. Like, your focus is on trying to win games. Your focus isn't if you're a player, is trying to get better, trying to help the team win. And if you spend your life worried about what people on Twitter or social media are saying, like, I mean, a certain Phoenix Suns player from time to time throughout his career it's just such wasted energy. And so that was an interesting part of his initial press conference for sure.
Where's my pen? I need to write this down. June 25th, Jim Eichenhofer becomes a Lakers fan, huh? I didn't know you would go that direction.
Wow.
But to your point,
how dare you?
I do think it is interesting from this standpoint, Jim. It set the tone as well, right? Maybe that organization, that franchise with the eyes always on them, the cornerstone stars that they do have, and AD and LeBron, I get it. I kind of imagine if you're in that locker room, I kind of like my head coach saying I don't give a bleep. And quite honestly, that's a T-shirt. If I'm the Lakers, I'm selling, right? I mean, you remember a couple years ago, with Willie Green, you got to fight or something like that. I love, especially in that market, that area. It's like, maybe we do care too much about all these. I don't give a bleep. Don't give a bleep. Go out there, do your thing. And it's interesting because you're seeing a change, I think, in the last several years on whether it's an organization looking at, hey, you know what, let's take a chance on this guy, something like that. Like, how much more of what you just said is maybe going to be the trend? How do you handle the players? How do you handle this increased medium where every single
it's
thing,
part of the job, yeah,
right? I mean, because look, yesterday and the day before, there's videos, and you've seen it, right? The Anthony Davis, Darvin Ham the video you saw, like basically like everyone ignored him. Austin Reeves walked by him. Again, you can cut that up to make that look. I don't know if that's the case or not, but they sure made it seem like everyone thought that Darvin Ham didn't know what was going on and doing all that stuff. Point is, that's reality. After every single game, after every quarter, after something happens, immediately on social media, there is a clip, there is a comment, and then there's a discussion.
Right.
Right. So I it's interesting you brought that up because, he did set that tone. And guess what? Now the reporters that are covering the Lakers know they're going to get a brutal, honest answer to them. And he just actually took charge in that press conference and let them know what it's going to be like.
And also maybe they know, too, not to ask that type of question, at least not that often. Maybe once in a while you throw that in. But, I mean, I feel like he's going to have the same answer every time. So you're right. But, I mean, for the record, by the way, I remain steadfast in my dislike and hatred of the Lakers. So I want that to be clear. But it is interesting from afar to see J.J. Redick take over as a head coach of an NBA team. And not just the Lakers. It could have been any team. From the experience that we had of the couple of years that he was here, including one of the seasons was COVID impacted, but we still got to interview him. He's one of the most interesting players that we've had here in the entire time that I've been in New Orleans because he's extremely intelligent, but he also has a very short fuse. And that combination, he also is very impatient with stuff that he doesn't like, whether it's a question he doesn't like or kind of maybe an approach a reporter is taking. We saw that repeatedly. I mean, I'm sure the fans, even in the videos that we posted on the site, saw that. So it was really interesting to me, and also really not that surprising because I remember there was multiple times when he did interviews here as a player where they had the video production guys had to go back through and bleep out stuff because they were like, out of nowhere, he would just start dropping F-bombs in the interviews.
Which is so interesting because when you normally say someone is intelligent and speaks well, they can control their emotions and their language, and that is not the case.
No,
but
not really.
We had to start with that, obviously, because it kind of just goes with everything, too. Here we are. The draft is coming up, and on Sunday, 5 p.m. Central Time, teams can start contacting players. Look, it depends, obviously, what time of day you scroll. And you see, Paul George, is he signing in, opting in, and getting traded? Is Jimmy Butler not playing his last days over there? Kevin Durant shooting with C.J. McCollum. Okay, I just did that. But anyway, all those different aspects of it. You don't know what's going to happen. But do you expect, Jim, the next 5 to 7 days, maybe make you, text out or tweet, wow? Do you expect some big moves?
I'm going to say yes because I feel like that has been more. It's been more common that we've had a hectic first week of July than it's been quiet and dormant. I feel like on average, there's not every year, but most of the time we do get some of these Woj bombs where you're just like, what? Where the heck did that come from? And you see teams that are totally remade and reconfigured based on the combination of the draft and the first part of free agency as well as some trades. So, I mean. Impossible to predict specifically what's going to happen, but I mean, I definitely wouldn't be shocked at all if there's some seismic moves that happen in the Western Conference, for example. But I think, one of the things I'm looking at right now in terms of the Pelicans and where they are in the Western Conference, if you look back at the playoffs, I feel like, we always want to have some takeaways from what happened in the playoffs, but the season overall, I mean, think about it that over the course of the regular season, for example, Gus, when you watch the Dallas Mavericks play, either against the Pelicans or in general, did you feel like the Mavericks are head and shoulders above the Pelicans? I would say no. Throughout the course of the season, you didn't say, like, this is a team that is so much better than the Pelicans that New Orleans can't possibly get there. They end up going to the NBA Finals. On the other side of the coin, Golden State finished 10th. In the West, they lose the first play-in game. They don't make the playoffs. Did you think throughout the course of the season that Pelicans are so much better than the Warriors? No. So the reason I bring up those two teams as examples of the point I'm trying to make is, to me, it shows you the margin. The margin is so small. Yeah. And I think a lot of teams are going to approach the offseason this way, that even though everybody's trying to hit a home run, everyone's trying to land a superstar, trying to drastically upgrade their talent on their roster on paper. We know that doesn't always translate necessarily on paper to the court in the games in the win column. But to me, I think it's smart to look at this as, if any team in the Western Conference, if we can get incrementally better, we have a chance to move up a bunch of spots from wherever we finished the previous year. On the other hand, the dangerous part of it is that that if you get a little bit worse, you could also drop 5 or 6 spots. One of the things that we're going to talk about with Will Guillory is just the depth of the Western Conference. So I think that is one of the most interesting parts about the 2024 summer in the West, is that the margin here is really small. That if you get a little bit better, you can jump up a bunch in the standings and maybe drastically improve your chances of going deeper in the playoffs as opposed to, getting knocked out of the first round and in the Pelicans' case, getting swept. But you also know that if it's precarious on the back end as well, that there's a bunch of teams that are gunning for you. The Pelicans finished 7th in the regular season. They ended up as the 8th seed by winning the play-in game against Sacramento. But there's a bunch of teams that were in spots, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 that are dangerous this year. So I think that's going to make this offseason really interesting.
It's crazy because we talked about this one of the last weeks that we were in here in the studio doing podcasts. During that last big homestand, right here come the Spurs. They'll look at that record, and you and I talked about what Pop was trying to do there. I mean, that was a team that was playing hard the last 2 weeks of the season and winning games, even though they had no shot. They were setting that tone for this season. And to your point, look, they got 2 picks in the top 5, and they got a team
top 8,
that
4 and 8,
beat. 4 and 8. They beat the Pels, man.
Right.
I mean, they legit win that game. I mean, when Miami, and you saw some of these other guys, and that arena was packed in San Antonio. And so, to your point, 2 teams that I can just think off the top of my head that were not in the postseason are going to be different next year, whether it's the Grizzlies with Ja Morant, if he's healthy and, not suspended. The Spurs are going to give you a game every single time you go in there. And I keep reading that Houston is eager to either get Marcus Smart over with Ime Udoka, trade that 3rd-round pick, probably get something in there in return. So, dude, again, you just look in your division, and it's hold on, to kind of see that. So let's get Will Guillory's take on this and see what's going on. He is with The Athletic, covers the Heat, the Pelicans, the NBA. Let's do that now. All right, time now to welcome in one of our favorite guests. They're all favorite guests, though, because Jim Eichenhofer, they pick up the phone and actually show up and be part of the podcast. So that makes us a favorite guest. But also, one of the beauties that I get to do here today, I get to introduce our next guest this way. Beat Writer of the Year for the state of Louisiana, covering your New Orleans Pelicans, Mr. Will Guillory, The Athletic, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations on that award this week, sir.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it. It still sounds weird hearing people say it, but I'll take it.
Look, in all honesty, man, one of the things that we love when we have you on and you've been a part of this community and watching and growing the NBA and being a part of it, man, I think so much of it is that comes across in your writing. You love this game. You love this sport. Now, Jim thinks it's just because you like to go shoot threes during practice and, open periods at the gym when no one's paying attention. But in all honesty, man, like when you get an award like that, it's got to feel fulfilling for you because you truly do love what you do.
No, and first off, I got to say, I shoot free throws as well. I prioritize the fundamentals.
I love that.
Guys, come on now. Don't shortchange me. But, man, like you said, I love the game. I've been loving it my whole life. Been watching basketball my whole life. Been following the Pels/Hornets ever since they came to New Orleans. It's been a crazy, honor being able to cover my hometown team, being able to see the fans and connect with them and having them know that I've got New Orleans roots. So, yeah, it's a true honor, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Yeah, congratulations, Will. It's funny. I've seen Will's very precise shooting routine that he does, when he gets ready for games or he gets ready for Pelicans practice and stuff like that. And there was always been talk that – that Will took JJ Redick's shooting routine and that he kind of modeled what JJ does. But actually, I think it's the opposite. I think JJ actually took Will Guillory's shooting routine, and that's how he was prepared for games during his career. So credit to Will for that.
There you go. Will, I guess that means you're just waiting for Eric Spoelstra to call it a day so you can go coach the Miami Heat.
Yeah, listen, I don't know if y'all watching Clipped, the show about the Clippers on Hulu, but
yes.
I subtracted the baked potato out of my routine. I don't do the baked potato, but everything else, me and JJ are identical in our pregame routine.
When I see the video stuff from the clips from that show on the Clippers, I always think of if you were a head coach, I feel like you would be kind of a Doc Rivers style coach with some of the way that you interact with the players, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm not much of a raspy voice guy. I don't think I've ever screamed so much that I had a raspy voice, but I can see me being on my Doc vibes. I don't know if I'm doing the sauna as much as Doc was doing it on the show. Doc spent a lot of time in that sauna on the TV show. We can have that conversation another time. But yeah, shout out to Doc and everybody else for that show.
I love that. So much to kind of get into here, Will, because it's interesting. The season came to an end. And then the postseason came, and I don't know, I think I've asked this to Jim, and I'll ask this to you here, Will. Were you expecting a different postseason? I kind of felt like I was ready for a couple of 6 and 7 game series. Jim, you and I looked at the Western Conference. We were sure some of these were going to be tough, and I was kind of surprised by the yawning kind of. I mean, am I off on that? I kind of feel like this postseason wasn't very entertaining.
Yeah, it definitely went by quick once we got to the conference final stage, right? Because those series went by so fast. But I think, part of it was that the East, I mean, we've talked about it a lot already, but the East, Boston just ended up going through it so easily just because there were so many injuries out there with the Knicks, that entire team falling apart, Halliburton getting hurt with the Pacers, the Miami Heat coming in with basically their whole team hurt. So, yeah, I think the East would have been way more competitive if it weren't for injuries. But I think the solution, but the conclusion was basically what we knew all year, was that Boston was the dominant team. They had the best roster. Their starting five was by far the best when those guys were healthy. And you saw them, finally put it out. And, we've talked about it a lot in comparison with this Pelicans team. They were rewarded for their patience and their belief in their star guys. And they finally put the right pieces around them. And you saw that belief, finally pay off.
Yeah, I thought the way the postseason went to it kind of felt like it just kind of crawled across the finish line. Whether it was, you mentioned, Will, the last 2 rounds, they were all quick series. None of them went more than 5 games. But also, by the time we got to the end of the finals, it felt like there were so many days between games. It was just like, it just felt like the momentum was completely taken away from the way the playoffs started. Not that it was ever great. I definitely think it was one of the poor, least entertaining playoffs of the last bunch of years, which is not something that I think we expected at all. It's just kind of interesting the way that went. But, obviously one of the big reasons why we want to have you on today was to talk about the draft, which is Wednesday night, and then Thursday afternoon/evening will be the second round. How do you characterize this draft compared to some of the previous years that you've covered since you've been the beat writer here? I mean, do you kind of buy into what people say in terms of, people say that there's not a lot of, that the talent is a little bit less this year, and just the unpredictability of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, first off, you said it with the draft. Everything's always unpredictable, right? So everybody talks about these guys who are in the top 5, but a lot of times we end up seeing a guy go in the 10 to 15 range who ends up being a great player. We saw it with last year's draft with Derek Lively, right? He goes to Dallas, makes a huge impact on their team, and they go to the finals, partly because they drafted him, in the first round last year. So I think with this draft, you're going to hear a lot of talk of the lack of, headline talent at the top of the draft. Nobody's really excited about who the number 1 or even number 2 or number 3 picks are going to be in this draft. But I do think that there's a good bit of depth in this draft. When you go from 7 to even into the 20s, I think you're going to see a good range of players, guys who can come in to contribute, in certain roles if they go to the right situation. So I think there are good players in this draft. It's just about where you get them and what situations they go to. So I think there's some quality players. It's just a matter of, finding the right fit for those guys.
Starting with the top of the draft, and I asked this with the understanding that there's really no right answer here, and there's really no wrong answer, I think, either. I mean, if you're the Hawks GM, who do you take number 1 right now?
Oh man, that is a tough one because we really don't know what that Hawks team is going to look like next year, right? We don't know if DeJounte Murray's going to be there. We don't know if Trae Young's going to be there. They got a lot of decisions to make, but I think personally, probably the safest decision will probably be, Rich Sachet, the forward out of France. He's a guy who can do a little bit of everything, bring size, and I think regardless of what team you're trying to build, it's always good just to have those big forwards who could do multiple things, right? We've seen the Pelicans have success with those type of guys with Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, even Najee Marshall, Dyson Daniels. And there's always value in having big wings who can shoot the ball, play defense, score in transition, and I think he could be one of those guys.
So I was going to ask you, do you look at the postseason and the regular season and kind of look at what's not just trending? Because we've talked about, obviously, the 3-point shooting and things of that nature, but Will, to your point, you can never kind of have enough of that, right? It's almost like the analogy in football. You can have enough good cornerbacks and receivers. Exactly. Is that what you look at no matter what your pieces are? Hey, can this guy defend and do those things? Or do you look at what Boston has done in the teams that were in the finals and kind of look at it from that perspective?
Yeah, I think what Boston showed us more than anything, obviously they were extremely talented, but they were also very versatile in the way they played, right? They can go small, they can go big, they can put multiple guards on the court, they can put multiple wings out there. I think as important it is to have that top end talent, you also need the ability to adjust to your opponent, right? I think that's something you saw with a Minnesota team where they were perfectly built to beat a team like Denver. They had the size, they had the defenders to put on Jamal Murray. That team was built to beat Denver, and they pulled it off. But eventually they went and played Dallas, and all of the things they did to build themselves up to beat Denver made them a terrible matchup for Dallas, right? And Dallas was able to take advantage of them constantly, and they couldn't adjust. So I think the important thing when you're building a team is not only just having that top-end talent, but building that versatility into your guys and having, that ability to switch up what you do and adjust according to your opponent. And I think that's extremely important when you're building a roster, having that, that variance and what you can do, because, playoff matchups are just like boxing matches, right? It's all about styles. It's all about matchups. And a lot of times you walk in feeling like you might be the more talented team, but if you can't match up, then it ends up hurting you.
One of the many things I think that's interesting about the 2024 draft is there's a lot of years where if you go to a website and you see an article about the draft and they have, photos of maybe 3 or 4 of the prospects, you'll see guys that are all projected to be, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I feel like a lot of people don't even know who some of these guys are that are projected to go in the top 10 this year. It's funny, like I feel like a lot of the draft websites, if you go to their banners and you see the players that they're kind of featuring or highlighting, it's a guy who's projected to be maybe picked in the 20s in Zach Edey, and a guy who a lot of people have going 55th in Bronny James. So I guess I wanted to ask you, I mean, these are a couple of the players that I think fans are the most familiar with, which makes that, unique to this year's draft. But in terms of Zach Edey, a player that, so many people are familiar with from his college career, how do you see him? Do you see him as a guy who is going to be able to adjust to the NBA and kind of defy the trend of the way things are going with, some of those traditional centers? How do you kind of see his future in the NBA?
I think he's a guy who could definitely find a role. I think a lot of people are kind of discounting what type of a player he can be just because I think we've all kind of trained ourselves over the Golden State era of the NBA to kind of say, hey, big guys are worthless come playoff time, right? You can play those guys off the court. But I think, again, getting back to what we talked about with Minnesota, I think you see more and more of these teams prioritizing size, prioritizing centers. And I think you're going to see a bunch of centers go in the first round this year just because teams want to play big. Of course, they want to be versatile. They want to have, the ability to stretch to the 3-point line. They want to run in fast break. But having multiple bigs, I think, is going to be really important moving forward for a lot of these teams. When you look at, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Dallas Mavericks, a lot of these teams have multiple bigs that they can put on the court. And I think having size and athleticism is going to be extremely important. A lot of times teams have prioritized athleticism in recent years, but I think having size is just going to be as important just because teams are, doing more often, throwing multiple centers out there. They're putting lineups out there where a typical 4 guy might be playing a 2 and they have a bigger ball handler. Like I said, just having that ability to throw different lineups out there, I think is going to be really important. And I think you're going to see a lot of teams adding bigs that can play either 4 or 5, that way you can size up and take advantage of some of these teams that, want to play small all the time.
In terms of Bronny James, I feel like there's opinions kind of all over the map as far as what his future is in the NBA. I mean, where are you on him in terms of what your prognosis for his career is, or even, what you expect will happen during the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he's going to get drafted. Rich Paul made that fairly obvious. I thought it was hilarious. He goes, listen, guys, if I was going to force the Lakers to take Bronny, I'd make them take them at number 17, okay? I'm trying to be responsible here, guys, and not force them to use a first-round pick on my client's son. So we should all thank Rich Paul for being so generous and not forcing the Lakers to do that. But I do think, man, that the kid clearly has talent. I think he can – contribute to a team in certain ways, but I do think it's going to take him some time to figure some things out. I mean, he missed, half of his freshman season at USC due to the heart condition, came off of the bench most of the year, didn't score much. I think he's got pretty decent athleticism. The shot looks okay, but I think he lacks size for the shooting guard position, I should say. Not really much of a ball handler at point guard. So he's got to figure out what kind of player he's going to be. I just think it's unfortunate that he's probably going to go into a situation where all eyes are going to be on him constantly. And it's so much better for a lot of these guys, like we've seen in New Orleans, where you could develop in the shadows, right? Where people aren't judging every single mistake you make. And then you can come back a better player. We saw this with Dyson Daniels. We've seen this with Trey Murphy. The team were hoping we could see this with Jordan Hawkins, where fans are kind of saying, we want to see these young guys play, but a lot of times it's better for them to develop behind the scenes to get rid of some of those warts. And unfortunately for Bronny James, there's no such thing as behind the scenes for him. Every single time he dribbles a basketball, there's going to be 100 cameras in the building. And I'm just hoping he'll be able to handle it.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you too as well, and because you and Jim have PhDs in salary cap and understanding and all this stuff, I have no idea what was it, apron one, or I hear the word apron, I think of putting something on so I don't get barbecue sauce splashed on me. But in all honesty, look, the NBA draft's going to 2 days this year, and we kind of all joke and laugh and be like, dude, I can't imagine teams are like, why are we here on a Thursday? But is and will the second round become more important, guys? The question, I guess, for both of you. The more now that this new CBA hits where you can only have so many max players, and now the max and super maxes, as we talk about BI and stuff, could be in the 50s and 60s and things of that nature. Like, how important is it going to be, Will, to develop, to draft that second round player and either put them in the G League or have them eventually contribute to your team, because you can only spend so much money now on top tier players?
Oh, there's no doubt. It's going to be extremely important. I think that goes for the first and second round. Having just cost control guys who you can, plug into your lineup, have them at a certain number and allow you to build in other areas. I think about in the NFL, the trend, right, where so many teams are saying, I just want a rookie quarterback, even if I don't love him, just so I can have a cheap quarterback and I can use that money to build out the rest of the roster, right? And I think bringing up Derek Lively's name again, where Dallas is spending so much money in the backcourt, having a center that's cost-controlled as a first-round pick allows them to spread that money out elsewhere, right, where you can spend on your perimeter players because your center position is you know what you're getting right there. So I think that's going to be huge. I think the Pelicans are in that category as well, where they're spending so much money on their perimeter players. Having a guy who can, exactly what he's going to be making for 3-4 years at the center position, I think is going to be a game changer for them if they can find that guy. And I think in the second round, in particular, looking at the Pelicans roster, look at a guy like Herb Jones, where they grab him in the second round. He's a hit. And not only was that second round rookie contract great, him being a second rounder, they were able to get him at a really good contract on contract too, because he was a second round pick, which is a game changer for the Pelicans. And now we look at Herb Jones as one of the best contracts in the NBA, a dude who's a first team all NBA defender making around 12, 13 million a year, where, guys of that caliber are making around 25 million in today's NBA. So there's no doubt you're going to see teams, prioritize hitting on these picks, especially after, the top 10, top 15. Because I think the discussion we're going to have with some of these guys in this year's draft is like, man, if you're going number 2, number 3, and we don't really love you like that, are you kind of overpaid as a dude making $10 million as a number 3 pick, where you're probably like a number 12 pick in some other drafts? So that, makes it even more crucial to be able to hit on some of these late picks where you actually feel like you're getting value for these guys. So, yeah, I think you're going to see that more and more as we get deeper into this CBA. And the only unfortunate part is that I think the Thunder own every single pick from now until the next decade. So we'll just be watching them draft players on some of these draft nights.
Yeah, I agree, Will. I mean, I think one of the things I'm interested to see how it kind of develops over the next few years is, obviously they changed the format of the draft so that it's two separate days. And I do wonder to some extent if part of that was that some teams, are prioritizing the second round more. So, just having more time to make picks, I think, is helpful. And as you said, I mean, I think some teams see those as more valuable maybe than they used to be based on the new CBA where, you need to have more guys on your roster who aren't making that much money to make sure that you have room for the guys who are making a lot of money so that you're not, going over the salary cap and going over the second apron and that kind of thing. So I'm interested to see how that's going to go and how, if at any, there's a impact of the fact that they're making it over 2 days. One of the things that I've heard some people talk about too, for example, this year is that, like you said, Will, it's not just the second round, but maybe even late first round picks might be a little bit more valuable because those are guaranteed contracts, but they're lower salary numbers. So, Boston has the 30th pick this year. So how do they take advantage of that? How do they, is it the kind of thing where a team now, because I think we saw in the past a lot of teams that were picking late first round, a lot of times they would try to look to trade those because they didn't want to have a guaranteed contract maybe on their roster.
Exactly.
Whereas now, you might say like, well, we need to fill a couple spaces with guys that aren't going to be making as much money. So that'll be interesting to see, how that develops. I know the Pelicans don't have a lot of second round picks coming up over the next few years, and they don't have one in this draft either as we record this on Tuesday. Speaking of the Pelicans, Will, I know you've been on some TV shows and different stuff over the last few days where people have asked you about the draft. How do you see them at number 21 in the first round right now? I mean, what do you think is most likely? Is it you see it, that they'll keep the pick? Do you think that there's a possibility that they could trade up or trade down? What do you think is maybe the most likely scenario for what they do with that 21st pick?
Yeah, I think like we've kind of discussed already, I think one of the good things about this draft, especially for the Pelicans, is that there are so many bigs in this draft and so many different types of bigs that I think they're going to eventually take one of those guys. I do expect them to stick at 21. Maybe they'll move up a little bit if they really like somebody, but I do think they end up taking one of these bigs just because for everything we've said, I think they need to add some more depth to that group. Jonas Valanciunas is obviously an unrestricted free agent. Same is true for Tyler Zeller, I believe. So I think they got to figure out just some depth at that position, finding more versatility, a guy who they can commit to long term. And I think it'll be really interesting to see, what type of guy they prioritize. Because like I said, they got a lot of different types of bigs. They got stretch bigs. They've got athletes. They got guys who play defense. They got projects, guys who've been around for 4 years of college. So I think there are a lot of different options, and I think it'll be interesting to see what type of guy they want, because it's a discussion we've had for the past 5 years in that what's the type of center you want to put around Zion, right? And I think you've seen that answer evolve over time with the Pelicans, where they tried Derek Favors. They went to Steven Adams. They went to Jonas Valanciunas. I think they've tried different guys. They've loved the Larry Nance fit. At the end of last year, we saw Willie Green say, hey, we'll just play Zion at center and just put 4 perimeter players around him. And they had a lot of success with that. So I think trying to figure out who that guy is and what type of guy they want next to Zion, and can they find a guy who they feel really good about playing that position for the next 3-4 years, like we've said, so they can use that money elsewhere to build up the roster, where you want to give an extension to a Trey Murphy. You want to eventually, give Jose Alvarado a new extension. You want to have money for Herb Jones' next contract. And if you can draft that center, I think it gives you freedom to build up the perimeter the way you want to.
Obviously, I don't think any of us, have time during the season to extensively study draft prospects and that kind of thing. But there's been certainly a good amount of negativity about this draft. But one of the things that you just touched on, Will, I thought was interesting is it maybe, though, the kind of year where when you are picking at 21, maybe this is a good year to pick at 21 in terms of, like you mentioned, if you're looking for a certain position, that maybe that there's a bunch of options, and then maybe it comes down to that it's kind of the eye of the beholder type thing where, it's going to there might be a bunch of different players that are possibilities at 21, for a certain position, and then it just comes down to, okay, so what type of guy do we want? Do we, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different versions of a 5-man, for example. Is that kind of how you could, if you're trying to be optimistic or positive about this year's draft, is that kind of the way that maybe you look at it?
Oh, no doubt. I think this is one of the first years where there were some front offices high-fiving because they weren't in the top 5, right? A lot of times we've seen those videos of teams so excited because they jump up in the lottery. This is the first year they were like, thank God we don't have to make the decision whether we should draft Reed Shepherd at number 3. We don't have to deal with those problems. We can just worry about who lasts through the lottery. And I think that's where a lot of teams feel more comfortable with this draft, being in that 15, 17, 19 range, where you don't have to reach to get one of these guys where it's like, man, I kind of like him, but I don't want to take him at 8. Sure. You know, where at 21, I think you probably feel a lot better with a project or a guy who stayed 4 years that might be a little undersized, or, you know, whatever. Or a guy like Zach Edey who might have questions about if he can play more than 30 minutes a game. You might feel better taking him at 21 than you would at 7, right? Sure. So I think this is a draft where you feel the only question is at 21, how many of those guys last that long? And I think that's where we get into the discussion about whether the Pelicans might get that itch to move up and jump up to 14, 15 to go get somebody if they really like them. But I think a lot of that's just going to come down to how the draft plays out. But yeah, I think this is definitely a draft where you would rather be in the 15 to 25 range versus 5 to 10.
It's funny, Will. I have a really good friend who's a diehard Wizards fan, grew up in Washington, D.C., and I've been texting him every so often. I've been saying, okay, well, would you be cool if the Wizards pick player X at number 2? And he's like, no. And then I sent another name, and he's like, no. I'm starting to run out of guys here. I feel like I've sent him about 8 players, and every single one, right, the number 2 pick.
That's crazy.
Every single player, he's like, no, that's not good enough for the number 2 pick. I feel like that might be one of the best ways to describe this draft is that, like you said, it's not enviable to be Atlanta's GM right now because you're in a position where no matter who you pick, there's going to be a ton of pressure on that guy because everyone's going to know that was the number 1 pick. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of confidence. I've never seen a year where I think even in 2013, which is the most comparable draft to this year in terms of the lack of excitement and hype pre-draft, I don't think I've ever seen a draft where there's not one player where everybody's raving about him. There isn't one player where people are like, this guy guaranteed going to be a great player. I think even in 2013, there were a couple guys, maybe Victor Oladipo, that pretty much everybody was sold on, like, this guy's going to be a really good player, but it doesn't seem like we even have that this year, which is so interesting.
Yeah, and I'm going to love seeing some of these GMs try to sell their fan base in their big, fan event. Like, hey, bring out this guy you never heard of. In most drafts, he would go 7, but we're really excited to take him number 1 this year. Everybody, let's bring him out. There's going to be a lot of that going on at some of these press conferences, teams trying to convince their fan base and probably themselves that they got somebody really good at number 2, even though in a normal draft, that guy would probably be like number 10.
Yeah, let's hope for the sake of some of the guys that are going to be picked in the top 5 or the top 8, that there aren't a lot of viral videos from like draft watch parties from different teams where they announce the pick and everyone just sits there completely silent. It's like crickets in some of these rooms.
And for people listening, it's not like we're trying to be ugly. This is literally what everyone is kind of looking at and thinking about this in this draft. And it's just so weird because, Will, there still is that feeling of need and importance, and as David Griffin said in his final presser here at the end of the season, it's an arms race, right, in the West, and other teams trying to get better. I was having this discussion with a buddy earlier this morning, and I'm just thinking too, like, you can get almost worked up when you start thinking of, well, I saw a report this week. Houston is in win now mode. Memphis is looking to trade up to number 3. The Spurs have 2 of the top 5 picks. They can either take 2 good players or young players or use them to get, veteran help. And then you add Dallas, who was just in the finals. I'm starting to get nerves all of a sudden. And you just have to breathe, right? But that's the thing. Every team, much less in your division, we hadn't even got to OKC and Minnesota and Denver and all of that. You almost feel like, do I have to do something? Does that make sense?
Oh, no doubt. And I think that's going to be the constant pressure on everybody in the West for the next few years, is kind of the do you want to be like Boston? Do you want to remain patient? Do you want to believe in your guys? Or do you feel like you got to jump? You got to make a move to kind of keep up with everybody. I think there's going to be that constant pressure on everybody, kind of weighing the value of continuity versus talent, acquisition. Feeling like you got to, do we want to believe in Tatum or Brown, or do we have to go get Drew Holiday, right? Do we want to believe in these guys, or do you have to go trade that first-round pick, trade those 3 first-round picks to go get star X to build yourself up? I think that's going to be the constant pressure on everybody in the West because, like you mentioned, not only the teams that are already really good in the West, you got these teams at the bottom who are coming. So Victor Wembanyama is on the way. He's going to be great, and he's going to lift that team. Houston has a ton of talent, and I'm not the first to say this, they're like primed for a 3-for-1 trade to trade like a package a couple of those young guys and go get a star. I think that might happen as early as this summer. They're dying to be competitive immediately. We know John Morant is coming back with Memphis, and that team's going to be strong once they're fully healthy. So, yeah, I think the West, you said it, it's going to be an arms race. It's going to be constant pressure on everybody to build your roster or put your team in a position to compete because we just saw it. I mean, the Mavs were, what, a 6 seed that went to the finals? I don't think that's going to be like an aberration for the next few years in the West. I think everybody 1 through 8 is going to be a threat to go to the finals just because all of these teams are so talented. There are so many great players. And like we mentioned, it's going to be a lot of, all right, did you get the right matchup? Well, that might be enough to get you to the conference finals, in certain years. So it's about building up your talent and putting yourself in a position to get to the playoffs and kind of roll the dice and see what happens. But, I think a lot of it is going to be dealing with failure like a team like the Pelicans. You walk away from this season feeling like, man, all of these expectations, you thought it was going to end better, and it ended real disappointing. But you look around once all the dust settles and says, man, we had one less win than the team that went to the finals. know, and it's like, do you consider it a failure or do you consider it, man, tough luck, come back next year and maybe you're in a better position with health, with matchups, so you could be that Dallas that makes a run. And it's hard to really make that decision as a GM. Do you feel like I got to make big moves to fix things, or do you say, well, with some better luck and better positioning, maybe we can make that run? I think it's going to be tough for everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Guillory, as always, man, we appreciate the time. We'll see what takes place here over the next couple of days. 5 o'clock on Sunday, teams can start contacting teams. And I don't know, is it called legal tampering or is it just when you can start contacting teams? I love the term legal tampering when the NFL uses it.
It's always the goofy season nowadays, and it feels like it started earlier than ever this year for whatever reason. We already got the major Caruso trade with OKC.
Yeah,
we got some guys already announcing that they're not going to sign with other teams, which is a new addition to the free agency frenzy. But yeah, it's going to be another crazy summer. This is what we love, so I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's see what takes place, man. Thank you as always, man. Appreciate the time.
Man, appreciate you guys.
As always, we appreciate the time Will Guillory gives us. And Jim, before we wrap up here, it was a bit since the season ended and the postseason ended. We do this for the draft, but it won't be that much longer until we chat again. You're not going to be going to Las Vegas for Summer League, which starts the 12th through the 22nd. And look, you kind of heard me mention it with Will Guillory here as well. I know it's just 5 games. I know they don't count their win-loss record, and I don't know if you hang a banner like the Lakers did with the in-season tournament if you win it. But I really do think because of the new CBA and because of injuries or because of teams almost being top-heavy in terms of their contracts and stuff, and I think you have to develop your players.
Sure.
And I think it is still key on that. It may not be everyone on that roster. It may be a player or two. For the Pelicans, I think there's a clear player that we're going to be keeping an eye on in Vegas to see how that player develops. And who do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, the last that we heard that was that Jordan Hawkins is going to be playing in Summer League. I'm not sure if it's going to be for the whole thing or first couple games, maybe contingent upon how he plays and if he, excels and that kind of thing. So but we'll be looking forward to seeing him play. I'm sure there'll be a couple other guys that we'll be interested in. But to your point, Gus, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that there basically were just 15 roster spots in the NBA for each team, and now there's 3 two-way contract guys, so you have basically 18 spots that you're trying to fill out. We've seen with the number of injuries across the NBA that it is important to keep developing guys. And also, we touched on this a little bit with Will, the way the salary cap is, it's more important than ever that you have guys coming through the pipeline that maybe Denver was an example of this. The year that they won the championship, they had some guys on their roster who didn't play hardly at all, but then they lose a couple guys in free agency, and all of a sudden, some of their rookies or second-year guys have to fill bigger roles. So that's important as well. I mean, it's definitely not the case. I do think, to go back 15 years or so, first couple times I went to Summer League, there were a lot of teams that put rosters out there in Las Vegas where you were just like, none of these guys are ever going to see the light of day. Like, these guys are all ticketed immediately for Europe. They're never going to be on an NBA roster. But I feel like every year you go there, there's like more and more reason to pay attention to not just the Pelicans, but all the teams throughout the league, because there's so few teams now where you look at their roster when they hand those out at the beginning of Summer League and say, like, there's not one guy on this team that I'm interested in. It's definitely the way that the two-way contracts have developed has definitely opened it up for more and more opportunities for more guys to perform.
I just think at the end of the day, it's development, and look, you've seen not only this team, but OKC, there's a lot of teams that are really investing in their G leagues.
Sure.
And those teams going back and forth. I mean, you just mentioned a guy in Jordan Hawkins. He went for a game or two. I mean, to be able to go there, get some action and do those things. Carlo Makovich, you would talk about, went to Europe, then was brought, stateside to continue his development and stuff. So I do think it's interesting from that standpoint to gonna see it, because we're going to see, I think, 4 or 5 players that were maybe on the starting 5. And how have they gotten better? How have they developed coming off of injuries and things of that nature? So I'm excited, but more importantly, I get to see what you're like in Cincinnati.
Oh, look out. It's going to be crazy. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure within the next couple weeks or so, or maybe, not too long after the draft, we'll probably get a better feel for the roster and who's going to be there for New Orleans, and specifically how they're going to fill that out in terms of which players are going to be there. And then July 10th or so, I think they'll be starting to practice out there. And then we still haven't seen the game schedule yet, which we were actually kind of eagerly looking forward to finding out when their first game is. Might be on the 12th, might be on the 13th, might be on the 14th, who knows. But it should be interesting, and I'm looking forward to covering that and watching how some of the younger players on this roster progress.
That is Mr. Jim Eichenhofer. Give a follow, Jim_Eichenhofer over there on X, and Will Guillory over on X here as well. Thanks for both of your times, and more importantly, thank you for tuning us in. Again, we'll chit-chat with you sometime around Summer League. Don't know the schedule, don't know what we're going to do. I'm sure we'll break it down. Poolside.
No doubt.
In the shade.
I'm going to put that in my demands that we have to have at least one pod by the pool.
Yeah,
definitely.
At least pod by the pool. There it is. You can hear the splashing and the slipping of a drink with an umbrella in it.
Thanks, Gus.
All right. We will talk to you again next time on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.